Hi, I'm James. In this video I'm going to show you how to use frequency separation to retouch a portrait. So this technique is the one that allows you to retouch skin and maintain skin detail. It's also the technique where if pushed too far can result in that kind of horrible fake porcelain looking skin. And like every technique, it all comes down to how far you push it. If you spend an hour or two retouching a portrait using frequency separation, it's gonna look unreal by the time you've finished. Most portraits you could spend, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour maximum, and you're gonna get a much more natural and realistic looking result. So what is frequency separation? Well, let's keep it really simple. You split the image into two frequencies, high and low. So the high frequencies are the finer details like the skin, the hair, things like that. And the low frequency, that's things like color and tone. So you work on those two different areas in slightly different ways, and when they are combined, you get that really nice result. So let's get started and see how it's done. For this technique, it's really important to be working with a 16-bit TIFF. So when you export your RAW file, just make sure you're exporting to that format. First up, we just need to make 2 copies of the background layer. So just hold down Ctrl and J twice, and then just double click on the top layer and rename that high frequency, and do the same to layer 1. Double click on there, and we're going to call that low frequency. Now, it's not absolutely essential that you do this, but at a glance it allows you to see exactly what these layers are. So it never really hurts to name layers when they are used for a very specific purpose. Okay, so let's just turn off the visibility of the high frequency layer, and the low frequency is highlighted, so it's active. So now we are going to go up to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And if I just bring this over here, so what we normally do with frequency separation is add blur to the low frequency layer, and the amount is going to be between 5 and 10 pixels. Now, the exact amount is going to depend on how much of the model's face fills the frame, but also whether or not you have an extremely high resolution camera. So the higher the resolution, the more blur you're going to need to add. But all that we're really trying to do here is just make fine detail invisible. So we don't need to add any more or any less. So let's take this to 7, and then just looking at the before and after there, you'll just see that we just lose the detail of the skin. We can still make everything out, and that's absolutely perfect. So once that's done, just hit OK. And next up, let's switch on the visibility of high frequency and just single mouse click on that layer to make it active. And then we are going to go up to image and then apply image, and I'll just bring that window over. So the source is correct. Layer, we're going to change that to low frequency. Make sure invert is checked. Change the blending mode to add, and just make sure that scale is set to 2, offset 0, and opacity should be by default at 100%. Now, my figures here were set to the correct amounts because I have recently used this technique, but if you're applying it for the first time, chances are those settings will be different, so it is really important that you check that they are correct. So once that's done, just hit on OK, and then what we're going to do to this layer is just change the blending mode from normal to linear light, and there we go. So there you'll see we have our original image as it started off, but we have these 2 extra layers. So just to keep things nice and tidy, I'm just going to hold down Shift and click on low frequency, and then Control and G to group those layers, then double click on group 1, and we'll just call it frequency separation. And then if I just click on the arrow there, it will expand the folder so I can see those layers in place there. The reason for this is that if we're going to be working on this image for a period of time, adding more layers to it, it just keeps all the retouching in one folder and makes life a bit easier sometimes. Okay, so the first thing we do with frequency separation is work on the low frequency. So we're going to switch off the high frequency and then just click on low frequency so that it is actually active. If I just bring up the zoom tool by pressing Z and just zoom in here. So what we're looking for here is patches of light. So here on the forehead, the nose and the cheeks and just the top of the lip there, we've got some highlights that have, where the skin's just burned out a bit from the studio light. So we can actually fix that. So what I'm going to do now is just hit B on the keyboard, and that brings up the brush tool. And just make sure that the opacity is set to 15%, because this is a process of slowly applying color so that you can build up until you have the effect you have, rather than going in at 100% and it doesn't blend in very well. This is a blurred image, so we're going to be working with a soft-edged brush because everything is about being soft and blending in really nicely. So I'm just going to press the right square bracket key a few times to make it slightly larger. So there we go. And if I hold down the Shift key and the left square bracket key, just press that a few times, that gives me a really soft edged brush. So now if I sample by holding down the Alt key and left mouse clicking from close to these lighter areas and just take that natural color, keep resampling and just paint over those areas that are looking a bit too bright. So there you'll see it's starting to blend in a bit more with the surrounding skin. Now I would normally take a lot more time doing this, probably a few more minutes, but it's probably not the most interesting process to watch, so I won't spend all of that time doing it. So here, let's just run down the nose. So I don't want to completely obliterate the highlight. I want there to be some kind of differentiation. So here we have quite a strong hot spot. So I was just using the right square bracket key again to make the brush slightly larger. Okay, so I think for now that's gonna do. So let's just switch on the visibility of the high frequency. So if I just switch off the folder visibility, there you'll see we've made quite a difference to that skin. So we've got all of that detail intact still, but we've just reduced that hotspot. So that's the first step. Work on the low frequency, get the skin tones balanced, and then we can start working on the detail. So for working on the detail, we are going to switch to the high frequency layer. So click on that. And this time we are going to use the clone stamp tool. So press S on the keyboard or look for the stamp icon. And this time we are going to be working at 100% opacity, and we are going to be using a hard brush. So that's at 100%. So that's the difference between these two layers. High frequency, it's all about 100% opacity, sharp, hard-edged brush. Whereas with low frequency, it's about lower opacity and a softer edged brush, because we're working with color and tone. Okay, so again, using the left and right square bracket keys, we can change the size of this brush. So let's move to an area where there are some obvious blemishes. So we have some here, and it is just a simple case of holding down the Alt key, as we did sample the color, and then just sample from an area close to a blemish, and then just cloning over. So the reason that we use the clone stamp tool rather than the healing brush is that they make a calculation and blend the clone area from the sample area. But we just want a clean exact clone of nearby skin so we can maintain that texture. And this tool just works absolutely perfectly. In a normal cloning situation on a face, if you were just using, say, an empty layer, the healing brush would be the best option, and a soft one. But this technique is slightly different. Now, one thing that I've forgotten to mention, but is really, really important, is that the sample for this tool is set to current layer. Now, normally we might be working with current and below, or even all layers. I know that I personally use current and below 98% of the time. Now, the problem with this is if we sample from the low frequency layer, that's going to cause some problems. I'll just show you what I mean. So if I sample here and then draw a line there, you'll see it's just not going to work. So it's really, really important that for the high frequency layer, when cloning, that sample is set to current layer. Okay, so I'm going to finish off retouching the face, removing as many blemishes as possible without making the skin look unnatural. And I may need to dip into low frequency just to make a few more adjustments to the color and tone. And then we'll take a look at another way of cloning that you may have to do in addition when using this technique. So here we are. This is the end result of retouching the skin. So if I just click on here, you'll see we've made some really subtle changes, but it doesn't look too unrealistic, which is the key to success. If you make people look like they're made of porcelain, then the viewer is always going to be aware that heavy retouching has been applied. Now, one thing that we can do here is leave the opacity of this layer group at 100%, or just to help the blend look even more natural, we can take the opacity down to 75%. And if I just Control and Z that, you'll see this is the after here, and that's the before. So we're just bringing back some of those natural highlights that we picked up during shooting, which makes, again, as I say, the whole effect much more believable. Okay, so just to finish off, if you need to do any other cloning to other areas of the shot, the best way to do it is the way that you would do it normally. So create an empty new layer. So that has just popped up into my folder. So I'm going to hold down Control and the right square bracket key to take it to the top of the stack. And let's just call that spotting. The reason for this, so let's take a look at this hair here. We have flyaway hair that could be cloned out. So if I just hit the clone stamp tool, and we'll set to current and below here, and because it's a grey background, it's just really quite simple to remove the flyaway hair. So any extra cloning that isn't to do with the skin, so I would say anything to do with the model's clothing, the background, that's probably best done the normal way. It's just a lot easier. And let's just move to the other side. So this is just removing a few of the flyaway hairs and not making it look, or trying not to make it look unrealistic. So again, as I say, this is purely for any additional cloning of other parts of the image, and it just keeps things nice and simple and separate. So let's just Control and 0 so we can see the whole image. So if I just group all of this up, there is our before and there is our after. So that is how to retouch a portrait using frequency separation in Photoshop.